in October. And as you would have heard last week, we're currently on course, or we would have been on course, to run out of places in the adult male estate in November. The government announced some measures to try to address that. But we're still on course to run out of places next spring. And if we go forward another couple of years, we're not just running out of places, we're running out of places in a pretty big way. 9,500 more people projected to be sentenced to prison and should be in prison than we have places. So that is the sort of big striking point from this process. And that has confirmed we're going to have to take action.
Why have we, and if I can indicate perhaps why have you as a former senior Conservative minister, been so bad at providing places, Mr. Gauke?
So what we've got is essentially, this is driven by more people going to prison. Fundamentally, that the largest cause of that is longer prison sentences. We've seen some changes, particularly in recent years, in 2020 and 2022, that have had an impact. But it has, in truth, been building up for some time. We have been slow in building prisons in terms of the process. From commissioning a prison to them being built does take quite a long time. That's why we just don't have an option, by the way, of building our way out of this short-term crisis. There have been moments where the prison population has plateaued. I would say that when I was Justice Secretary, it was pretty stable, but it's been going up rapidly here. Part of it has been perhaps the police are arresting people, more people are being charged, and so on. And some people, we can understandably say that's a good and healthy point, but it has left us with this issue. So we do have to face up to that reality. There's no easy way of just sort of ignoring it, hoping it will go away. There's some easy solution that's out there that we're not making use of. It does require quite difficult choices.
Okay, sir. Pens at the ready. Enough from me for now. Let's get those questions going. Peter's in, where are you? Peter's in Crosby in Liverpool. Peter, you're through to David Gauke. Go ahead, Peter. Morning.
Good morning to you, Mr. Gauke. I worked for the probation service for over 30 years, and much of what you've said in this review is very, very familiar. It's going to place a lot more pressure on the probation service, which, as you know, has been reorganised twice in the last 15 years. And I know the sort of things that you're saying about more resources are needed, different uses of technology, third sector, targeted at high-risk offenders. Now, all this has been done before. There's nothing new in this. But what is new is the amount of resource that is needed to implement this on a much larger scale.
So what is your direct question to David Gauke, Peter, if I can move you to that?
Well, my direct question is, these resources for the probation service, are they going to follow a complete rethinking of the role of the probation service, an overhaul of the way the probation service is organised and its priorities?
David Gauke?
So I think Peter has immediately raised one of the most important issues here and very central to our recommendations. If you are moving people from custody into the community, you need to make sure that we can cope in the community. And the challenge that is made to everyone here is, well, can we cope? And at the moment, the probation system is under strain, and we are very upfront about that.
Understaffed as well, is it? Under strain, under-resourced?
Yeah, both.
All of the above.
There is an issue about not retaining staff quickly enough. To be fair to the government, they have for some time had ambitious plans in terms of recruiting new people, but just as we're recruiting people, we're losing people and so on. And although this was a review of sentencing policy, we took the view very early on, myself and the panel with whom I've worked, that we also have to set out a series of recommendations on probation. And Peter's touched on many of those. So
in addition to what you've done today, do you mean that's still...
No, that's in there. There is a chapter in our review that is dedicated to that.
And what are the headlines from that?
So the headlines from that are more resources. Peter actually has given a very good summary of it. Greater use of technology. Now, let me give you an example of this. Probation officers spend quite a lot of time every day writing up notes of the meetings that they have had with offenders. Increasingly in the rest of the world, we're using AI to do that. And there's already a pilot in place to make use of AI to write up notes. We recommend that is expanded very rapidly. That can free up time for probation officers. It also gives probation officers to do the work that they want to do. They don't become probation officers because they have a strong desire to write up notes. They have a strong desire to help offenders, and we want to give them more time to do that. I think, again, as Peter mentions, about reprioritisation of probation time on the most dangerous and the most prolific offenders, and using the third sector. There are a lot of terrific voluntary organisations out there who can do a lot of the work to assist the probation service.
And the government has already said, you're probably aware, they're trying to earmark £700 million for the probation service. I think that announcement is today. Is that enough?
Well, it's a very substantial increase.
It's a major step.
It's a major step in the direction. Of course, one could always ask for more. I'd like to see the details of how that's going to work. There are plenty of demands for spending in this area, but I think it would be fair to acknowledge that is a major uplift on current spending. Right. So I find that encouraging, but I'd like to see the details.
Peter, thanks for the work you do. Moving on to Graham in Swindon. Graham, you're through to David Gauke. Go ahead with your question. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is, do you not think that for the more prolific shoplifters and stuff like that you're effectively giving them the green light to let them know that the system doesn't work?
Why does this interest you? Do you own a store? Have you had problems with this?
No, I've done store detective work for over 10 years.
Right.
So I was at the front of it, catching the prolific shoplifters that they would get arrested, go to the CPS. The CPS would just not enough evidence, and then they would be out back doing it again.
Lastly, the newspapers would say there's been a marked escalation in the amount of shoplifting offences over the recent months and years, actually. You're, again, up the front line. Would you concur with that, Graham? Is that about right?
100%.
100%. All right, let's stay on the line. We might come back to you. What do you think lies behind this, if I can use the word, explosion in shoplifting?
Well, it certainly is a significant increase in shoplifting. I think a lot of this is in truth about enforcement and prosecutions. The evidence tends to suggest that what deters offenders is more likely the chance of enforcement, i.e. being convicted, than the length of any prison sentence. But in terms of our recommendations, we've got to think who these really prolific offenders are. And I don't for a moment seek to excuse or justify their behaviour, but they are, by and large, drug addicts, alcoholics, and what happens if they are convicted and sentenced to prison? They go in for a few weeks, a few months. It does nothing to address those problems. To be honest, their problems may well get worse. If they've got a home, they might lose their home. If they have a job, they very often don't, but if they have a job, they lose their job. Family relations get damaged. They come out, they're more likely to reoffend. And yes, society's
How do you break the cycle?
So there's a number of proposals in there. There's more I think we can do about drug treatment, about alcohol treatment. There's monitoring that can be done. So
what do you mean by monitoring?
So actually you can equip them with a tag that will be able to tell whether they've consumed any alcohol or not.
And what happens to them then? They go back into jail.
Well, you have then got
there in the first place.
No, well then you can. There are measures. I mean, look, we're not ruling out the possibility that someone can go to jail, although we think short sentences are a mistake. There will be exceptional circumstances where it is the right thing to do, where someone has breached an order or reoffended. But actually compliance with these alcohol monitoring tags is extraordinarily high, in fact. One of the recommendations we make is something called intensive supervision courts. We've got 4 of those piloted at the moment in this country, but they're used around the world. And what happens there is that offenders meet regularly with a judge. They will assess their progress, and there are regular meetings. And actually, the evidence from that is that does break the cycle. Because your question, Nick, about how do you break the cycle is the right one. What we know is that short prison sentences are pretty useless in doing that.
But there is sort of negative reaction already to the idea of tagging, or possibly people not going to be able to see their football matches if they were involved in some kind of crime around a football game. Something I put to your former colleague, Conservative Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick.
There's no sense of deterrence if instead of going to prison, you merely get a tag. And the Justice Secretary's latest big idea is called prison outside of prison. I don't even know what that means. That sounds ludicrous. The idea that a tag or not being allowed to go to a football match is somehow a punishment for a criminal.
How would you respond to your former colleague?
Look, Robert's an old friend of mine, but I disagree with him on this particular issue.
Where do you think the public are?
There will
If
be
someone's
different
nicked
views.
my car,
Yeah.
I want them to go to jail.
Yeah.
I don't want to be able to just not go and see Tottenham win a game.
Yeah, well, there'd be. It's a good day for Tottenham today, but they'd be pretty lucky to see Tottenham win a game this season. But look, in terms of punishment, punishment is important. It is part of the system. We shouldn't think that punishment only means prison. There will be people, for example, who a driving ban will be a real inconvenience and difficulty for them, and it will feel like punishment. But we also have to recognise that it's not just about punishment, it is also about rehabilitation. And although we might feel better about someone going inside for a few weeks, does it stop them committing crime in future? And I think most victims want there to be fewer victims in the future, and that focus on reducing crime is important.
Let's get a quick response from Graham from what you've heard. Coming back to you, just remind everybody, you've been in store security for years. You have witnessed this rapid increase in numbers. Graham?
Yeah, hello.
Yes, your response to what you've heard.
The response of, obviously, the fear of a conviction and stuff like that. These people are not scared of the conviction, hence the reason that they keep doing what they're doing.
Why do you suppose they're not scared, Graham, lastly? Do they ever tell you, I don't care because whatever, or do they not?
No, because they know that they basically, if they do end up doing a prison sentence, it's short. They'll probably come out knowing more about crime than they went in.
Well, some would say that speaks to the point that Mr. Gauke made about education, of course, and in a way, we don't want we don't want prison sentences to be effectively a time of university of crime. Graham, good luck with the work you're doing. Look after yourself. Stay safe. Thank you. Bill's in Edmonton in London. Bill, you're through to David Gauke. Go ahead. Good morning.
Morning, gentlemen. I was a prison officer many years ago. And what I'd like to know is what you're going to do about the conditions that prison staff have to work in, and also staffing numbers, because one of the major concerns I had, and I still do, was the conditions that prison staff had to work in. Morale was incredibly low, mainly due to understaffing. Even when you're at full capacity, official full capacity. I was on a wing that was 30-1, C wing or Wormwood Scrubs. Now, obviously, that's not only a security risk, but was hugely contributed to the lack of rehabilitation, because prisoners do have needs, whether they like it or not. And they also need to be addressed when there's wrongdoing.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lack of staff, you just can't deal with it all. So rehabilitation, an awful lot of it was down, or lack of, an awful lot of it was down to the fact that there just weren't the staff to deal with sort of day-to-day issues. And unlike police officers, firefighters, healthcare staff and teachers, prison staff are not directly required by members of the public, so the well-being of prison staff isn't therefore seen, as a vote winner.
Okay. I'm going to finish there because so many people... I think, Bill, what I'm going to sum up is better conditions, better pay, much as we said about probation staff. What about prison officers as well, Mr. Gauke?
Well, can I thank Bill for the service he did as a prison officer? But that point about overcrowded prisons makes it harder for prison officers. It makes it harder to rehabilitate prisoners. And again, I think that is an argument for taking action here. We run our prisons really hot. They are full. It is hard to move people to the right prisons, get them where they need to be, if they should be in a training prison or wherever it might be. If you can reduce some of that pressure, and Bill's point about the prisoner to staff ratio, one way of addressing that is to control the prison population. So I agree with the point that Bill is making, and I hope that looking at our report, some of the measures there are important. Also on discipline within prisons, we recommend a progression model that takes more account of how prisoners behave within prison. So they'll be released at one point if they behave. If they don't behave, they'll be released later. That, I think, is a useful tool for prison officers in terms of maintaining discipline within prisons.
Bill, I absolutely agree there. Thank you for the work you did. Staying with prison officers, Mr. Gauke, you'll be aware there's been a series of fairly high-level attacks on some prison office staff, and there was a call around 10 days or so ago for the idea of so-called supermax jails or supermax prisons or units. Where do you stand on that?
First of all, it is disgraceful what has happened, and I think everybody's sympathies are with the prison officers and their families. We do need discipline within our prisons. We haven't looked specifically at that with us outside of our terms of reference as a sort of sentencing review. We do, but clearly we need to do what we can to protect prison officers. It is unacceptable that they're put under the risks. They face the danger that they do. And so my own view is I'd want to look at the evidence to see what is effective to do that. I would certainly consider that measure.
Mr. Gauke, you know how the media works. So one aspect that they've alighted upon, you won't be surprised, is this idea of so-called chemical castration. How exactly would that work? Would people be mandated to it? Has it been piloted anywhere in the United Kingdom? David Gauke.
So in terms of our recommendations, there is currently a pilot in place in the southwest of England for chemical suppressants. It is a voluntary arrangement. It is focused on some sexual offenders. I don't think this is the right answer for many sexual offenders, but for some who have got sexual desires that they actively want to suppress.
Well, the Sun suggests it's paedophiles you would be looking at. Is that correct?
For example, yes. And I mean, I was talking to a friend who works in this area who knows of cases where you had offenders who desperate to rid themselves of these desires and were very keen to be able to take chemical suppressants to try to reduce those urges. And what we argue for in this report is that we build up the evidence base, that we continue that pilot. But what we are looking at, what we are recommending is a voluntary arrangements, and as I say, particularly targeted. This is used elsewhere. We've looked at international evidence on a whole range of things. All we're saying here is that we should look at it.
So if I use myself as an example, I'm taking it on trust, or it is administered to me by an NHS clinic, whatever the drug is, or how does it work?
Yes, so it's administered.
So I know the system knows I've had my injection.
But this is all
oral. How is? I don't even know how it's done.
I think it's an injection,
Right,
as I understand it. But look, I think this is one where we want to build up the evidence, and let's be clear, this is not a solution to most sex offenders. But it could play a role in reducing risk and allowing some of these offenders to move on, if you like.
You rightly reference that a lot of petty crime, although not petty for the people involved, is sometimes fueled by addiction to alcohol or on drugs. Is there ever an idea that you would look at people taking drugs that would actually stop their intake of alcohol or stop their, I know it sounds weird, but drugs to stop them taking drugs?
Yes, and it's one of the points that we mention in that. There's very early evidence, and we stress this as early evidence, that some of the weight loss drugs may, yet another use for them, may well be effective in terms of reducing desire to consume a lot of alcohol. Now that is very early evidence. There's nothing registered for it. There's lots of the trials need to be done, but there is some evidence that could suppress.
This drug does everything.
It does appear like that. Yeah,
I'm going to teach you to play the piano if you take it. It's ceaseless. This drug. My goodness. Let's go.
Yeah, as I say, I don't want to sort of overstate its early evidence, but we say that the government, we urge the government to monitor that, because that is something that potentially down the line could play a useful part.
There you go. You get a Zempic and you give up the grog as well. Nadine's in Cardiff. You're on the radio, Nadine. Go ahead. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nick. Good morning, Mr. Gauke. My son Connor was murdered in 2015 by a supervised known offender who was currently serving 2 community orders. My question to you is, why is it that victims' families are again not considered or represented in this review, even given the additional powers of the Victims Commissioner were still not recognised and still not part of any statutory law?
Well, can I just say on victims, and Nadine, I'm so sorry for your loss, and thank you for raising this case. The point about victims is an important one. In fact, one of our recommendations is that in the purposes of sentencing, there needs to be explicit reference to victims, which is not the case at the moment. One of the panel members is a representative of the victims community and was a very influential voice in terms of drawing up our recommendations. There are a number of measures that we set out in terms of our recommendations here that are relevant to victims.
Shouldn't you have more victims' voices?
Well, we did have a victim's voice on the panel, so absolutely we engaged very heavily with the victims commissioner, the domestic abuse commissioner, and many victims groups. I've spoken to many victims in the course of this report. I'd make the sort of fundamental point on victims of crime is what most victims want is to ensure that there are fewer victims in future. And that is why we have to be very focused on reducing crime overall. That punishment is, as I say, an important part of our system, but so is rehabilitation in terms of reducing crime. And when it comes to community sentences, the point that we are arguing for is for them to be more effective, that offenders are more closely managed, more closely scrutinised, particularly at the high risk period when, say, they're released from prison. That's the point of greatest chance of reoffending. So I do understand the concerns, Nadine, that you have raised here. But also, of course, it is not good for victims if we end up with an emergency set of releases of prisoners.
My condolences to you as well, Nadine. Thank you for your call and as much comfort as you can get. On a related story that you won't be aware of, Mr. Gauke, LBC has done some research that shows that between January 2020 and April 2024, 244 offenders were let out from prison on licence, went on to be charged with a murder committed after their release, which obviously, again, asks questions of the system. You didn't have sight of this, so this is coming to you fresh. Your reaction to the figures I've just shared with you?
Clearly, that number is too high. I think there's a couple of points I would want to make on that. The first is we do need to be more effective about supervision in the community. And if you like, our central recommendation about a new progression model does essentially say we shouldn't go from the point at which someone is in prison and then they're released on licence. And yes, they might have meetings and what have you, but that isn't working as well as it could do. And what we recommend is a more intensive supervision, so that people are, if you like, eased back into society to a greater extent. And we think we can make use of technology to a greater extent, tagging, home detention, and so on.
Final question, Christine in Maidenhead. Can you keep it fairly brief, Christine, because I've got about 2 minutes before my colleague James comes in. Your question.
Yes, of course, Nick. Thank you for taking my call, and hello, Mr. Gauke. So is it fair that offenders who took part in the riots last summer are receiving substantially less prison jail time than Lucy Connolly?
This is, of course, the woman who put out what's called the Southport text, in which she made some rather disobliging and indeed illegal suggestions about what should happen with asylum seeker hotels. It's a little bit off your brief, but you won't be surprised as a former Justice Secretary. This question's come your way, Mr. Gauke.
I'm not surprised, and Christine, you're perfectly entitled to answer that question. What I would say, I don't think it'd be right for me to comment on individual cases. There's been a court case, there's been a Court of Appeal hearing. Those judges have seen all the evidence here.
People are surprised by this, though, Mr. Gauke.
They are.
I mean, for instance, someone who actually physically threw rocks at a police officer got fewer months in jail than someone who sent out an absolutely vile, reprehensible, actionable social media post, Mr. Gauke.
The point I would make is that when you look at an individual case, you have to understand all the circumstances, all the factors, and I think it's hard when you have not done that to kind of comment upon it. So I'm reluctant to be drawn into individual cases, but I do understand the upset on this case.
The work you and your colleagues have put in, how will we know it's a success? How many prisoners do you think this could affect? How many thousands? And when might it be in effect?
I think the test of this is to ensure that we are not in a position where we have emergency releases again.
Ever? You're comfortable?
Well, for the foreseeable next few years.
So there won't be another one now? You think we can address that?
I believe if we implement this report fully, we will not be seeing emergency releases over the next few years. I very much hope that is the case. I also hope we move to a system where we are more effective in terms of reducing reoffending, that contributes towards bringing down crime. and that we can have a reset, which I think is a better balanced criminal justice system in which prison plays its part, but also what happens in the community plays a bigger part too.
Going to hold you to a number. How many prison places would you hope this might free up? 5,000, 6,000, 10,000?
More in the region of 10,000. Our numbers are 9,800 if this is implemented in full. If we can really crack on with improving rehabilitation, I hope that number will be higher compared to what it's projected to be.
Grateful for your time. Thank you. David Gauke, former senior Conservative politician who chairs that Ministry of Justice Sentencing Review. I'm done. James O'Brien's the other side of the news here on LBC. I will be back with you, of course, tomorrow morning from 7. Meantime, stay safe.
Thank you, Nick. I wonder whether that last caller could have joined in the right-wing media's attempt to turn a woman who publicly called for a pogrom into some sort of cause célèbre. Absolutely extraordinary.